So today is the first of a two-part series on growing in God. And today I want to think about the significance of truth. John chapter 8, verse 31 to 32 says this: "To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, 'If you hold to my teaching,'" I've got a wee slide with this on it, "'you are really my disciples. And then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free.'" You've probably heard that verse quoted, that last part, in many different contexts. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We hear it quoted in movies and all over the place. And it was Jesus that said it first. And I want to just expand on that a little bit this morning. To grow in God, we need to know God. And the only way we get to know God is by actually involving ourselves in what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to understand what truth is, and not only to understand it in an intellectual sense, but to understand it through putting it into practice, okay? So there are three things that stand out to me in this passage: holding on to Jesus' teaching, knowing the truth, and being set free. And today I want to think mostly about this second point about truth. What is truth? And why is this important to me? Like, it is, when I was a wee child, I was always a curious child. I was always asking questions. I was brought up in church. I became a Christian when I was 6. That was my decision, nobody else's. And if you think that being a Christian and brought up in a Christian home was easy, let me tell you that it's not. It's got challenges. And when I got to 14, I had to make that decision again. When I got to 18, I had to make that decision again. And when I was 20 years old, I got baptized. So it's not an easy life, but life is never easy for anybody, isn't it? But I took a picture of some of my journals, my notebooks, okay? I recently dug them all out, and I put them all into order, and hopefully they're still in the right order after me taking that picture. But they're filled with things that people have said, and I've gone away and I've asked questions about what people have said, and what do I think about that? And if you've been in any of my assemblies in school, I'm looking over at this side where many young people are sitting, you will know that I will say, don't just believe this because I'm telling you, go and look into it for yourself. Work out what you believe and why. Don't just believe something because your teacher tells you. Why? Because we all have our biases. And today I want to think a wee bit about truth, okay? By the way, that's not all the notes I've ever taken in my life. I transferred that into a digital version. I have a thing on my computer called Journal, which is password protected because there's some really private stuff in that. And it's a way where I can go back and I can make sense of things that I didn't understand in the past that I might understand better now. Pilate asked this question of Jesus: what is truth? It's a great question. And the ancient Greek culture, they used the word aletheia, and it was synonymous with reality, which is the opposite of illusion. And it's from a root word called aletheo. A means not, and theo means hidden. So truth is the opposite of that. It's something that is not hidden, okay? Not hidden. You know that phrase, somebody's showing their true colors? You've heard me say this before, that when the squeeze is on, if you squeeze a tube of toothpaste, what comes out of the tube? Toothpaste, okay? When the squeeze is on, who we really are, all the stuff that we try to hide can suddenly become revealed. Or is it only me? Have you experienced that? Like somebody's testing your patience and what's really inside comes out, and you're like, oh dear, I shouldn't have said that. So what we're talking about is actually what is hidden being revealed. And often truth is revealed in adversity. If you go through hard times, truth can be revealed, but we can also learn truth in hard times. I don't know why I didn't become an engineer that did destructive testing, okay? There's people who do that. They do destructive testing. They test things to see at what point they break. Well, I was like that as a kid. I would keep pushing until something broke. I'm like, okay, that's at the point at which it breaks. Not always very helpful. But Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So let's think about truth for a little second. In what ways and to what extent is our view of truth shaped by others? Do you notice that wee echo? Echo, 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 echo. I don't know where it's coming from. We've had this for a few weeks. I think there's a wee ghost in the machine. How do we cut through the static to actually get to truth? If you know what I'm talking about here, in the world that we live in, there are so many things. How do we drill down into what is actually true and what is false? I want to just, for a brief moment today, do a little social commentary, okay? You can watch a film. It's a fascinating documentary called The Social Dilemma. You can find it on Netflix. And it talks about the power of social media. And it doesn't talk about it in a positive light, let me say. And there are some people who created things on platforms which shall not be named, okay? And created with all the best intentions, but those things get used for destructive purposes. And it's been proven that algorithms and social media polarize us by feeding us more of what we already think or what we want, those two things. And therefore, they serve to only reinforce what we already believe. This is why our society becomes polarized. This is why our world becomes polarized, if you look at this. If you watch that documentary, they'll tell you this. And I was reminded about some of the people who were involved in this as I was looking at it this week. And there's a lady called Cathy O'Neill who said this: an algorithm is an opinion embedded in code. She was talking about the things that steer us around the internet and social media in particular. And I'm looking at Alex. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about with this, okay? And this scared me, actually. An algorithm is an opinion, a human being's opinion embedded in code that influences our lives, and sometimes not in a good way. On this website, you'll find that they say that the technology that connects us also distracts us, divides us, manipulates us, monetizes us, and controls us. And what I'm about to say next, I have found research on this over the years about the correlation between social media and mental health issues. It's now a proven fact, okay? And I found that from two different sources in the past, saying the same things and presenting the same information. But this is what it says on this website. A 5,000-person study found that higher social media use correlated with self-reported declines in mental and physical health and life satisfaction. That's staggering, isn't it? And what that says has been proved by data over the years as well. This is frightening, this next thing. 64% of people who joined extremist groups on Facebook, just said it, did so because the algorithms steered them there. I don't know about you, I look at what's happening in our world, particularly in a digital age, and I find it a wee bit scary sometimes, because I don't know who's on the other side of that click. I don't know who's on the other side of the internet, and I don't know what they're doing with my data, really. We're living in an increasingly polarized country as well. How can we get to a true perspective on truth unless we're prepared to really listen to the people that we disagree with? Right? If you just talk to your pals about the stuff that's happening, what are your pals going to say? Most of them are going to say, yeah, I agree with you, that's terrible, eh? You need to go and speak to somebody on the opposite side of the argument and say, so what do you think? And they're like, no, I don't know if I see it the way you do, but let's have a discussion. There are some things which have happened in our nation over the last few years which have highlighted how polarized we have become as a nation. These are not political statements, by the way. I don't do politics from the platform. The independence referendum, 55.3% of people voted to remain, while 44.7% voted to leave. And that was with an 84%, almost 85% turnout. That's such a close margin, isn't it? This is not a political statement, by the way. I'm just saying that these are close margins. And then a little bit later on, we took a vote on Brexit, and 51.9% voted to leave the EU, while 48.1% voted to remain. It's not a political commentary. I'm just making an observation about how divided we are and what we think is right for our nation. But how do we come to that place? How do we know what's true? How do we know, and like I'm going to say this a third time, it's not a political statement, okay? How do we know who to vote for these days? How do we get to the truth? The most recent thing which I have noticed that I think is, again, saying that we're polarised as a nation was the vote on assisted dying down at Westminster, where 314 MPs voted in favour of the bill and 291 voted against. Again, these are close. These are very close decisions. 23 votes of a difference. And it highlights that we're very divided as a nation. In Scotland, we took a similar vote, our MSPs did, on a bill that's now at stage 1, and 70 MSPs voted for and 56 voted against. These are narrow margins. But it illustrates how we're making big decisions, but there's not a lot of margin in which direction we take. And this is, I've just been watching this over a number of years now and thinking, how did we get to this place? How did we become so polarised in our views? And I think one of the things is how we view truth and how we come to a position on anything and say, well, this is true and that is not true. This is something that's been revealed. This is something that, to me, is hidden at the moment. And we don't know everything, okay? If you're a person in here today and you know everything, come and have a chat with me later on. I'd love to do coffee with you and find out how you got there, okay? But the bottom line is that we don't know everything. And I came across a book just recently. It was at some point last year. It's called Building Belief by a guy called Chad V. Meister. He's the Chad Meister, okay? Building Belief. And it's a fascinating book. I've not finished it yet. But he talks about truth, and he talks about different ways to think about truth. And he defines truth this way, as one view is the correspondence view of truth. And that view states that things as they are, it states things as they are, sorry. It corresponds to reality, okay? So, let me just say this, okay? This is one way to think about this. Where is the Wallace Monument? Sorry? In Stirling. If I had to say to you today, the Wallace Monument is in Edinburgh, you'd think, you need to go and have a wee nap, okay? Because we all know it's in Stirling, okay? We can say that with accuracy because we've been there, we've seen it, we've taken the pictures, and some of us have got better pictures than others. A friend of mine took a picture of the Wallace Monument years ago, and there was all this mist in the foreground. I was so jealous of that photograph, but she stayed up there when she was studying, so. It's in Stirling. It's not in Edinburgh. That's the correspondence view of truth. And then there's the coherence view of truth. And that states that if it's internally consistent, then it's true. So if it agrees with everything else that you believe, then it must be true. Okay. And if you've got eyes to see, there are gaps in that way of thinking. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Do hobbits exist? Excuse me? There's one standing in front of you. No, I'm only joking. Do hobbits exist? Think about this in relation to the coherence view of truth, okay? Only in my imagination. I've seen the movies and I've read the books, right? Oh, sorry? They do in New Zealand. There's a New Zealander talking. I like it. I think I'd be quite at home in Wellington. I'd love to go and see that. Do hobbits exist? Let me tell you the answer, according to the coherence view of truth, is yes. Yes, they exist, okay? They are entirely coherent in Tolkien's world. If you've ever read Tolkien, he has whole books of history relating to the story that he wrote about the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings and all these. They are entirely coherent. They are consistent with that world. Yet, it is entirely fictitious. So yes, it's true, but it's also fictitious. Why do we have this view at all? It's because when somebody says, I believe in God, you're like, but how can you prove you believe in God? Can you prove God exists? And I'll say, can you prove that he doesn't? And they'll say, no, the burden of truth lies with you because you're the one who's making the statement. And I'm like, that's a bit unfair. But because we can't empirically, in a scientific age, and let me say, the world of science has been shaped by believers who believed in God and who were trying to understand God. Back hundreds of years ago, these were the people who were involved shaping. Anyway, that's another story. But they say, so that correspondence view of truth is hard to prove. So maybe the coherence view sounds a bit more like it. Now, I had a bit of a quandary as to how I was going to do this. And I've been back and forth all week, and I'm like, shall I even do this or not? And I came to the conclusion I will, but I'm going to use the book to explain it, okay? And I'm going to put these glasses on, which are my reading glasses, which means I'll not be able to see your faces when you go, huh? Huh? Right, okay? So this might get a bit confusing, but try and listen carefully, and I'll explain it, okay? Because there's a hole in this view of truth. And Chad, the Chadmeister, explains it in his book. And I'm going to read his version, okay? So here we go. Are you sitting comfortably? I lost my place marker and it's still opened at the right place. Okay, so this is what he says. He says, I was recently in a local coffee shop and overheard a conversation between two college students. One was a Christian, the other one was a Zen Buddhist. The Christian was sharing the good news with the Buddhist, and the Buddhist responded by asking why Christians are always saying that their view is right while everyone else's is wrong. Let me put a little statement up on the screen for you to read. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I can't see that screen, so I'm reading it from my own memory. This is an absolute statement of truth, okay? The Christians struggled a bit. Let me just find my place. While everyone else is wrong. Why can't we just all be right, he asked. Why do you have to tell me I'm wrong? The Christians struggled a bit with a response, and I asked if I could join the conversation. They both agreed, so I took a napkin and I began to draw out the law of non-contradiction. Remember that, put a place marker in that. The law of non-contradiction. I then drew a box around it in a little diagram. And this is how he viewed it, okay? Essentially, it's saying that one thing can't be not that thing, okay? You get that? Like an apple can't be an orange. But what this is saying is an apple can't be a not apple. I just put an apple and orange. You've heard that phrase, eh? Apples and oranges. Saw the one in the same. I don't know about you. If you try to make an apple pie with oranges, it's not going to taste like an apple pie, is it? Right? So apples and oranges are different. An orange is not an apple. And that's what he's trying to say here. So I asked the Buddhist if he had ever heard of this law, and he noted that he had. Clever guy. So I explained that given this law, if Christianity were true, if it were the case that Jesus offers the only way of salvation, as he claims in John chapter 14, verse 6, I got it right, then it could not be true that there are other ways of salvation. And he disagreed. He said that Christianity could be true to me and Zen Buddhism could be true to him. So I said, in other words, you believe the following. Let me click again. You believe that an apple is an orange. In other words, the law of relativism. So what he's saying is that, I'll just stick to the script here, okay? Let me just stick to the script. Yes, he said, it can be the case that Christianity is true for you and not Christianity, in other words, Buddhism, is true for me. But this is impossible, I quipped. This violates the inviolable law of non-contradiction. Are you still with me? Like, I can't see your faces, like, okay, so. I don't believe in that law, he said. It's simply false. At this point, I suggested that we call his view the law of relativism. It's on the screen. And I placed it directly above the law of non-contradiction, as shown on the screen. I've took the time to illustrate it for you. Then I asked him if he was saying that the law of relativism was true, while the law of non-contradiction was false. Yes, he said, the law of non-contradiction is clearly false. Are you following me? Are you like, there's a few, I can sense there's a few people scratching their napper today. I then suggested that for the sake of argument, we call the law of relativism A. And since the law of non-contradiction is clearly not the law of relativism, should have had an earlier bed, we call that the law of non-contradiction. So then we have the following. Now the problem, of course, is that he was saying that A is the case, but something that's not A, that A is the case, not A. Like an apple can't be an orange, right? But he was saying that that's not the case. We call this the law of non-contradiction. So then we have the following. Now the problem, of course, is that he was saying that A is the case, not A. But this is the law of non-contradiction. A does not equal not A. In other words, he was using the law of non-contradiction in an attempt to refute the law of non-contradiction. In other words, what he's saying is, he's contradicting himself. Right? Are you getting that? He's saying, I don't believe in the law of non-contradiction. That doesn't exist. The law of relativism does. But you have to use the same law that you're refuting to prove the thing that you're saying. And it's what philosophers for years have determined as a self-stultifying statement. Sorry. Like, somebody give me a mirror so I can see my confused face. Like, an apple can't be an orange. It just doesn't work. You can't say, when it comes to faith, all roads lead to God, because it doesn't make any sense. If you ask a Christian who's a firm believer, if they believe that Jesus says he's the way to the Father, do they believe that? They'll say yes. If you ask somebody from another major faith group in the country, and you ask them if their way was the right way, they would say yes. And any true believer would say that their way was the right way. How do we get to the truth? And that's where it gets complicated. What I want to say today is that our world gets confused with how to think about truth. If something's true, it needs to be true for us all. It can't just be true for some people. You can't say, well, that's true for you, but not for me. That doesn't work. That's not truth. That's opinion. And there's a difference between truth and opinion. There's also a third view of truth that the Chad Meister talks about in his book called The Pragmatic View, which states that if it works for you, then it must be true. And there's even more holes in that way of thinking about truth as well. Like, that doesn't make any sense, okay? But Jesus says you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And we need to find a way to think openly about what is true and what is not true so that we come to a place where we have a knowledge of what is true. Remember we talked about at the start, the Greek word that they used was not hidden. And so there's a degree to which, to grasp truth, it needs to be revealed to us. I remember when I was at college studying mathematics, and my mathematics teacher would teach us by reading from the book as I've just done. So it's maybe not a good way to do it, okay? But the thing is, he could read faster out of the book than I could read in my own head. And I would come away from the math lesson and think, I don't have a clue what he talked about. I will need to go away and research that for myself. And I had to go home, and all the things that he'd done, I had to do it all again because I didn't pick up anything he said. And so I had to dig down into what he was actually saying. And as I studied those books, the truth of what was being said came to my mind. It was revealed to me because I studied. And it's like that with lots of things. We sometimes just accept something because everybody else says it or does it, and therefore it must be right. Well, that's not the case. People en masse can be wrong. When we look at what happened in the 1940s, people en masse believed something that wasn't right. They believed that another person could be subhuman, and therefore we could treat them any way they like. But that's not the case. But lots of people believed it, and we have history books that tell us about a genocide that should have never have happened. But people were influenced by a lie. They were influenced en masse by something that wasn't true. And this was before the days of social media. We need to understand what's true. We need to come to that place so that we can come to a place of freedom. And I know that you've been sitting for a long time, but if I can bring a caveat, I've been standing for a long time. So if you'll just give me a few more minutes, okay, to think about freedom. Freedom is, this is my definition, freedom is the individual's choice to think, to speak, and to act independently. It's like that moment when you've grown up as a kid, or your pals say to you, you can't do that, and you say, you're not the boss of me. Have you ever heard that? Like, you're not the boss of me. I can make my own decisions, okay? Yeah, I could tell you lots of stories about that, but we're running out of time. Freedom is the ability to think and to speak and to act, and those freedoms, these freedoms that we enjoy, and lots of people in our world don't, are actually enshrined in the Article of Convention of Human Rights. These things are enshrined in there, and you can read it for yourself. But we can't use our freedom to do our own thing. The apostles, as they wrote to the early churches that was beginning to grow, said, don't use your freedom to indulge in the sinful nature. We know that there are things which are wrong and bad for us, so don't use your freedom to indulge in that. Peter said this, don't use your freedom to cover up evil. It's not a cover-up. We're trying to come to the place of truth, not hiding things, but coming to the truth. Freedom is closely associated with choice. And years ago, I heard somebody saying that poverty is the absence of choice. That resonated with me as I looked at the world that I was growing up in. Poverty is the absence of choice. But that also includes spiritual poverty as well. It's not just enough to know the truth. We need to be able to live the truth as well. True freedom comes not from doing our own thing, but from living within the boundaries of what God has taught us through Jesus. John chapter 17, Jesus is saying this when he prays for his disciples. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. James said, speak and act as those who are going to be judged by, listen to this. This is amazing. Not by some big scary judge with all these rules and regulations. It says here, by the law that gives freedom. You'll know the truth, what Jesus teaches, and it's living out that truth that brings us to a place of freedom. True freedom is not found in cutting loose from Jesus' teachings, but in finding our way to live in them. And I wonder, sometimes these days, has relativism, perhaps that lack of certainty about what to believe and what's true, has that added to an overall feeling of freedom in our nation? Do we feel really empowered and do we feel free? Or has this lack of attendance to the teachings of Jesus and doing things our own way led to an increased anxiety in our nation? I don't think our nation has ever been as anxious as it is today. The systems that are supposed to help us are not helping us. And again, that's not a political statement. It's just an observation. A lady called Helen Cameron said this, ultimate theological truth claims rest on Christ's claim, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth embodied in a person. If we want to get to know the truth, we need to get to know the truth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life, not any other way. And as we get to know him, we begin to embody that truth ourselves as we become like him. This truth is to be grasped through the practice of the Christian life. I had to cut so much content out of what I was going to say today, but the bottom line is this. Truth is the knowledge which has been revealed to us. And as I stand here today, and as I was really moved by what we were singing this morning, I can say that in my life I have experienced God's presence in the good times and in the bad times. And God has been at work in my life there, speaking to me in ways that I could spend another half an hour even just scratching the surface, in ways that God has led me. And I was talking to a pastor during the week, and he told me about how he came into ministry. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Clearly called. Truth is knowledge which is revealed to us. The question is, do we truly want to know Jesus' teachings? Do we want to know him? Each of our lives fit into a big story, like our family story, perhaps. But think about society's story just now. Our lives are fitting into a much larger story. It's a historical story as well. And I want to encourage us today not to get sucked up into a fictitious story generated by algorithms and misinformation and biases. I want to encourage you today, as I would with the kids in school, think for yourself. Think for yourself. I don't know what you're going to do as you go home today, away from today. Are you going to say, I'm going to get Chad Meister's book and I'm going to read that for myself and see what he was really saying, okay? I'm going to get a Bible and I'm going to check up those passages for myself and see what he was really saying and if I agree with that. And I would say, I would stand here and clap my hands if you did that. If somebody's got questions and you go, I don't know if I believe in what you're saying, I'm happy to answer those questions. I came across something else this week as I was preparing for today, and I think it sums up what I'm trying to say about getting into this big story. The gospel, the good news of Jesus, isn't a formula that you apply to your life. It's the story you're meant to inhabit. And I love that. There's a grander thing happening that my life is fitting into. I'm like a little piece in the jigsaw, a little tiny blip in the universe, yet significant at the same time. And who I am and what I think and what I say and what I do is important in the grand scheme of things, because how I interact with others, whether positive or negatively, will have ripple effects in their lives and down through other people. And it's exactly the same with you. I want to encourage you to think about this. If you've not got yourself into that story, and I don't know everybody in the room today, Jesus is inviting us into this story. He's inviting us into his story, history, past, present, and future. He's inviting us in to play a part and to find truth through him. You maybe never invited Jesus into your life before. You may be kind of thinking, I don't know if I know what this pastor's been talking about all this time for the last 35 minutes. And I should finish, okay? But I want to say this last thing. If you've never done that, I did this when I was 6 years old. I just prayed a simple little prayer. And it wasn't as eloquent as this prayer, but I was just kind of acknowledging that actually I want to have God in my life. Like, I want him to help me to be the person he wants me to be. It was entirely my decision as a 6-year-old. And then as a 14-year-old who'd managed to almost survive first and second year with difficulty. And then as an 18-year-old, when I'd managed to survive school and was trying to work out what all this meant. And then as a 20-year-old, where I actually was very convinced about who Jesus was and that he wanted me to be part of his plan to enter into his story. And it was at 20 years old that I got baptized. And it's a simple prayer as the start of the journey. I want to encourage maybe people to think about that prayer today and maybe think about praying that. So I'm going to finish. Thank you for listening so patiently, for your encouragement. When I was able to see your faces, it's so good when people smile back at me and go, yes, that's so encouraging. But think about this today and think about your response to what we're talking about. I want to encourage us all to dig in deep, ask deep questions, ask hard questions, okay? So would the senior leaders please stick their hands up? 1, 2, 3, okay? So all your hard questions, get them ready, and the senior leaders are going to answer those questions, okay? Write them down, get all your hard questions, and they're going to answer all your questions for you. So let me just pray as we finish off today. Father, we just thank you for your presence in this world. We thank you that you change us. And Father, you have been changing people throughout history. Father, you've been changing people to do amazing things like start the Answer Project next door. Father, you've been changing people and they've done amazing things to help other people in our world because we realize that the truth is something that sets us free. And Father, the truth is something that motivates us to do something about the things that we see in our world. The truth is something that motivates us to be the best person that we can be through your help and with your strength. And so, Lord, we pray, help us to lean into those things. Help us to be the people who ask the hard questions and to ask the difficult questions, to keep questioning, to keep thinking, to keep coming to that place where truth is revealed to us. And so, Lord, I pray that our minds and our spirits and hearts would be open to receive everything that you want to deposit into our lives. Lord, help us to be aware of the things that are around us that would be distracting, that would lead us down rabbit holes that we don't want to go. Father, help us to be able to cut through the static of social media and all that it does and says. Father, just the way that influences these days. Lord, help us to be able to put our phones down and just to maybe spend time with you and ask with our Bibles in hand what you think about something. So, Lord, lead us and guide us in these things. And maybe, Father, for those who've never prayed a prayer to you today, not this one anyway that's on the screen, maybe we could maybe be challenged and think about doing that. I'm just going to read this wee prayer out as I finish off. Dear God, I know I'm a sinner. I ask for your forgiveness. I believe Jesus is your Son. I believe that he died for my sin and that you raised him to life. I want to trust him as my Savior and follow him as Lord from this day forward. Guide my life and help me to do your will. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.